there are three basic ways that we are pulled to sin. There are three basic types of temptation. And Jesus, it was funny when I was working this up, I was going through it, and I was like, wait a minute, oh, this happened to Jesus too. And I'm like, wait, this one happened to Jesus. Like, wait, I'm just taking a biblical model that I thought I came up with, but this is actually what happens. We face the three different types of temptations, and Jesus faced all three of those in the wilderness whenever he dealt with that temptation. The first temptation that we deal with is just the desires of our bodies, your cravings, your hungers. And that's probably the strongest one. Right? What was the first temptation? It was food. That was the first temptation. There was some pride involved there too, but it was like, this food looks good to eat, and I'm not supposed to eat this, but I want to. So Eve was the first one to break the diet. That's how that works. That was a joke. But anyway, we did that. And Jesus, when he faces his first temptation in the wilderness, it's food. It's the same thing. The Spirit led him into the wilderness and said, I don't want you to eat until I send you food. That's basically the way that went. And the idea was to be physically weak so that he was spiritually strong as he dealt with temptation. Because this whole thing about Jesus being God and also human, we needed to demonstrate that he had to deal with temptation too, that it wasn't just he breezed through it, but he was in a physical body that craved things, and he had to be in a weak position so that no one would ever be able to say he didn't fully take our place. So he didn't eat. And Satan tempted him and said, hey, if you're really who you say you are, just turn his rocks into bread. Let's have something to eat. The second kind of temptation that we face is not just the craving of our bodies, but it's shortcuts. Like if I just go through there and do a little bit wrong, it'll make my life a whole lot easier and I can do a whole lot of good, right? If I know this is kind of a shady business deal, or I know this is really their bonus to get and not mine, but if I just take this think about what good I'll be able to do with this. And this temptation of a shortcut was there for Jesus too. His whole thing, the whole reason he was sent was to take back the world from Satan, right? It's to take it back. And the process to do that was them waiting for a long time and sending prophecy so that it would be there, and then Jesus coming and living and suffering and enduring all the things that we endure, and then suffering and dying on the cross, and then resurrection, and then a couple of thousand years of waiting so that more people could be saved until the point where he comes back and takes everything over. What Satan says is, we can skip all that. I will surrender right now. I'll turn everything over to you if you just bow down and worship me one time. Think about how much good you will do. Think about how much trouble you will save. Worship me one time, and we got a shortcut. And we get those shortcuts too, right? If you just do this one thing, think about how much good you can do. Think about how much easier it'll be. And we get tempted by the shortcut. The third thing that we face is pride. It's I don't want to look bad. It's everybody else is doing this thing. And if you think that because you're not a teenager anymore, and those of you who are teenagers, we just know, but you think because you're not a teenager anymore, you're immune to peer pressure, you are wrong. And your pride of everybody else is doing this, and what am I going to look like if I don't do this, and how is this going to work? Or God says to do this thing, and if I do this thing, I'm going to look like a fool. You want to know, we talked about baptism a lot the last few weeks, and I'm not really trying to hammer on anybody about this. But one of the things that I've heard from people who have not been baptized and they're adults is they're embarrassed that they're not being baptized until a certain age. Seems like they just assume everybody else did this when they were kids, but now they're at this point and they're older and they feel like they should, and it's a pride issue of, well, I don't want to look like I didn't have my stuff together enough to get this done before. And you allow pride to push you into sin. Satan said to Jesus, took him up on top of the temple, and he said, if you really are who you say you are, challenge that pride. If you are who you say you are, prove it. Prove it. Jump off. And when the angels catch you, everyone will know who you are. You will be vindicated. Desires, the desire of your body, hungers of your body, cravings of your body, shortcuts, and pride That's all there is. Everything else falls under one of those categories. John, the apostle, talked about this in 2 John. I think he called it the lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. And Peter is writing to a group of people who are being pulled and pushed towards sin, not just by one of these, but by all three at the same time. And one is hard, but three can feel impossible. And he writes to them, and the way that he tries to help them is by getting them to look beyond just the moment to the consequences. Let's start reading in 1 Peter chapter 4. Since therefore, and when we see that, I got to do the Bible teacher thing, right? When he says, since therefore, that means that everything else that came before this is what leads us to this conclusion. So we've talked about suffering and Jesus suffering and us suffering and how all that works. And he says that following Jesus is going to lead you to these things. And Jesus did this first, so it's okay. And he said, if all that's true, then the result of that, the thing that we should take away from that is this. Since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves with the same way of thinking. For whoever has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live for the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for human passions, but for the will of God. He presents two different paths. And the way that he's going to talk about them in this passage is he's going to talk about the path of the flesh and the path of the Spirit. And he said what Jesus came to do was to walk the path of the flesh with us. The path of the flesh, and if you're going to walk on a path, you really need to know where it goes, right? You need to, we did the corn maze the other night, and nobody had any idea where it was going. We knew the exit was out there somewhere, but we didn't even really agree on where, what the exit was. You got to know what path you're on whenever you're walking this. And so the ultimate destination of this path is judgment. That's where it lands. You are walking on a path towards judgment, and there's two different options. And Jesus came over to the walk on the path of the flesh, the path that says you are going to be judged by your actions. And when you stand before God, you will be found guilty because you're guilty. All have sinned. All will suffer the consequences of that. So you're guilty. You walk on this path, and what's going to happen is you might have a good time for a while, but you're going to suffer at the end. But what Jesus came is he walked the path with us, suffered the consequences of death, but then defeated that and came back. It started a new path, the path of the Spirit. The path that doesn't lead to judgment based on your actions, but leads to judgment based on the actions of Jesus. You are still guilty on both paths. But on this path, the path of the Spirit, when you stand before your God, you're judged not based on your actions, but whether you trusted in Jesus to stand for you at that place. So what Jesus did is he came and walked this path of the flesh and created a new path, the path of the Spirit. And since Jesus has walked that path with you, you have an example to follow in that as you have to deal with choosing between the path of the flesh and the path of the Spirit. The thing is, when we trust in Jesus, when we recognize that we are sinners, that we are bound for hell, that there is nothing we can do about it, but only Jesus can do that, we are moved, and our destination is changed. But what we like to do is we like to walk along the path of the Spirit and then keep looking over here at the path of the flesh and say, I want me some of that for just a minute. Like, that looks good over there. I'm going to run right over here and do that. I'm going to jump from the path that I'm on and run back over here and have me a little of the stuff that I miss over here. And then when I get in trouble, Jesus will just get me and bring me right back over. That's what we do. Instead of picking a lane, we just jump back and forth. But what Peter said is, like, you're looking at this the wrong way. Because whenever you're walking this path of the flesh or the Spirit, all you're seeing is the suffering you're enduring because you're on this path. Everybody else over here is doing stuff that you don't get to do. Everybody else over here seems to be having an easier time with it because they just go with the flow. Everybody else over here is not suffering because they're following Jesus. But he says, all you're seeing is the pleasure that they have and not the poison that comes with it. You've got to have the same attitude as Jesus, where you see not just the pleasure of this path, but the pain of this path. Because what happens, and I'm reading through Proverbs right now, constantly through that is don't envy the wicked. Don't envy the wicked. because you see them over there having a good time and think that your way is a lot harder because you're sticking to the straight and narrow, but they're over having a good time and you're envying and you want to jump over there. But what you miss out on is all the consequences of that, all the pain that they endure through that. And again, if you're going to pick a pain, because you're going to have pain on both sides, pick the path of the Spirit. Jesus came and he walked with us, but he didn't look at the path of the flesh as something to enjoy, but something to be rescued from, and created the new path. And he said, look, I want you to follow me in this. He said, but Jesus, you're skipping all the fun stuff. You're only going the difficult path. But Jesus walks the path that leads us away from the destruction. But we like to jump back and forth. He said, if you're going to walk with Jesus, you got to arm yourself with the same way of thinking. That you look at the path of the flesh and see not just the pleasure, but the pain. Not just the sweetness, but the poison. You're going to live for the rest of the time in the flesh. You're stuck in this meat sack until the day that it dies. And while walking this path, what we have to do is remember that our true path is the Spirit and not lean in to the desires of the flesh, the cravings of the body, the pride that leads us into sin, the shortcuts that we say, if we just went through there, we would have a much easier time of it. And then he goes in and he talks about this idea about what they're facing and why they're facing it. And let me just say, this is a list, okay? This is a list. This is one of those lists that I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on because we got kids in the room. We're trying to keep it PG, but this is a thing that they were dealing with and Peter went to and said, this is what you got to deal with. You say, okay, we'll pick the path of the Spirit. We're not going to pick the path of the flesh. Okay, no problem, get it. But then he lays out this list of the things they're going to have to choose between. In verse 3, it says this, the time is past that suffices for doing what the Gentiles want to do, living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. With respect to this, they are surprised when you do not join them in the same flood of debauchery, and they malign you. Now, when you look through these lists that Paul lays out, it's all like things that we all deal with. But you look at this one and you kind of focus on the middle and you're like, I don't know that that's an issue for me. Like I'm all too worried about this. But that's the reason that we look at this list this way is we're just focusing on the cravings of the flesh. We're like, well, I don't crave that. I have no desire to go out and get drunk. I have no desire to participate in just that middle one. I don't have any desire for any of these things, so this list doesn't apply to me. But I want you to think about all three of these things that they're facing. He lists out these things, and just to give you an idea without going into too much detail, sensuality is just turning yourself over to inhibitions, whatever you want to do, turning yourself over to that, letting go of self-control. So that's sensuality. Passions is that as a lifestyle, okay? And their culture was very different than ours. Even though our culture is getting kind of out there, we're still very much based on a Puritan culture where you don't do anything enjoyable at all. So if it's a good time, we're worried about it from the very beginning, and that keeps us pretty close to where we need to be, although we miss out on some stuff that's okay. But for them, that was the opposite idea. The Greek philosophy was that the more inhibited you are, the less free you are. And so you demonstrate freedom by removing all inhibitions. You demonstrate your freedom, you demonstrate your maturity, you demonstrate your understanding of the world by just enjoying everything and not trying to control yourself, but turning yourself over to anything that could possibly pop into your imagination. Like, I can't, it's different now, but like, I remember when I was a kid, like there were certain words that you weren't allowed to have on TV, and now it's like children's shows. Like, I'm surprised that we can do this. I'm still not caught up on that. There are certain things you couldn't show. And so for us, this puritanical idea, we're not really worried about this, but for them, their festivals were all about how drunk can you get, how high can you get, and what kind of things can you get yourself to do. And the further you went with that, the more celebrated you were. So for us, we say, you got to have some self-control. For them, it was no self-control. How crazy can you get? And this is not just privately. This is multiple holidays a year where the entire city would just get as drunk as possible, get as high as possible, and do any creative thing they could think of with themselves and their bodies, with anybody that was around. And this was a part of a public holiday. He says, everybody else is going to do this. And you may not want some of these things on this list, but the idea of losing control and just giving in to what you want and not having to be so controlled all the time, not having to just hang on to things, and whether that's for you, it's going after pleasure, or whether it's just letting loose and tearing into people and destroying them with your words, whatever that is, the idea of I just want to stop having to be in control all the time is a temptation. He says, your bodies are going to pull you to letting them be in charge. But it's past time for that. Drunkenness and drinking parties. Let's talk about those two. Drunkenness and drinking parties. Drunkenness is pretty easy, right? It's drinking to the point that you're not in control. And that's different for everybody where that line is. There's not a specific line about that. But whenever you drink, and because of that drinking, you're no longer in control of your actions, or you're at the point that you're willing to do things that you would never be willing to do otherwise, that's a problem. And I think we get mixed up about alcohol, and we're like, well, it's about the substance. It's not just about the substance. It's about the control. It's about the life you lead and the decisions that you make. And anything you do that compromises your ability to make good decisions is dangerous and a problem. And when you go to the point that you're drunk and it's not you making those decisions anymore, you've turned over complete control to something else. Drinking parties would be really difficult to avoid. And you're like, it's not difficult for me to avoid, but it would be really difficult for them to avoid. See, when we talk about drinking parties, this is what it sounds like. It's getting together for the purpose of drinking, but this wasn't just like, hey, let's get all our friends together and have a drinking party. This is you've got a client and you want to keep their business, so you throw a special kind of event for them, and this is this event. Or you want to close a deal, or your boss is giving you a bonus. And the way that it works, you're honoring somebody to try to get their business, to try to bring them around. You have this party, and it's about drinking, it's about getting as drunk as possible, but that's not the only thing that's happening there. They would bring in some off-duty women to come in and work overtime. Let the reader understand what I mean by that. They would bring in people to do those things. So it's not just the alcohol, it's the thing where you're trying to close the deal, and so you throw a giant party to honor these people, and this is what that party is like. And I want you to think about how difficult that would be in business. Like some people close deals on the golf course, right? Go to the golf course and you close the deal. Or, you take the clients to Vegas, or you do whatever and you close the deal. But what if the expectation was for them to buy from you, or to sign a contract with you, or to set up a deal with you, you're going to throw one of these parties for them. That's the culturally accepted thing to do. And if you don't do that, they're going to be insulted and they're not going to do that deal with you. What do you do? Let's go back there, and we'll say this word as few times as possible. Let's go back to orgies and talk about that. This is not private household events of just people getting together for extracurricular activities, okay? Although that's a problem, but that's not what we're talking about. These are public festivals that they would have as part of worship of their gods, but also just as a part of, like, this is Thanksgiving, this is Christmas. Bacchus is the god that they honored most often with this, and he's the god of revelry and wine. And if you want a blessing from him, the way that you get that is you participate in the bacchanalia, right? The bacchanal. Bacchanalia is the adjective. But you participate in the bacchanal, and what you do is you get to honor him. You get as drunk as possible, as high as possible, and you go as crazy as possible to honor him. And if you do that, then he blesses you for the year. And you know how it is, right? Some people don't care about Jesus, but they still do all the Christmas stuff. Some people aren't grateful at all, but they still do all the Thanksgiving stuff. And this becomes a part of the culture, which it's a thing that you do. And for us, we're like reading some of these words and like, this is awful. Like, who would ever do this? What kind of perverted church is this that he's having to write this to? But they didn't have that view. They grew up doing this. This is what they did. This was just a part of life. This is how they did things. And he said, you've got to separate yourself from that. And lawless idolatry, we know what idolatry is, right? That's worshiping an idol. So, well, I would never worship an idol. That's easy for me. This whole list is fine for me, not a big deal. Except that their culture was so wrapped up in idolatry that the government and religion were not separated, but they're mixed together. Some people think they're mixed together right now. You don't know. Like they're mixed together in a way that you could not possibly extricate them. So let's do it this way. In the Roman Empire, the treasury of the Roman Empire was in the Temple of Zeus in Rome. It was in the basement of the Temple of Zeus. And the priests of Zeus were in charge of all the taxes, and they took care of that. So when you pay your taxes, at least in Rome, it was a little bit different whenever you went out to the outlying areas. When you pay your taxes in Rome, close to Rome, you're interacting with the priest of Zeus. Jupiter, because we're not Greek, they're not Greek, but we're talking about Roman stuff here, but to the priest of Jupiter. So let's say that you have a contract that you want to sign. You do a deal with somebody, or you got a lot of wealth and you want a will recorded somewhere. The place that you record that is the Temple of Vesta. They're if you've ever heard of Vestal Virgins, that's the Temple of Vesta. And their whole job was to do this, was to keep track of important documents and to keep fire going in town, right? You can't just go out and light a fire. You can't just get a lighter. They don't have strikers to do those things. Lighting a fire is difficult. So the Temple of Vesta, what they did is they kept the fire going. It's called the Holy Fire, Sacred Fire. They took care of it all year long. And you live in Rome, let's say you live in Rome, or you live in one of these big cities where you're not out a lot, you don't have a kitchen in your house. Most people don't have a kitchen because it's too hot and fire's too dangerous. It's expensive to keep all the food stores. And we saw this when we went to Pompeii. There's all these food stalls, and you can still see because there's these holes, and they would build a fire under it, and they would keep this stuff going all day long. And you don't cook in your house. You go out to get it. You don't have a fire in your house during the summer because it's hot. Well, then winter comes around, and you need a fire, and you're a city person. You don't live out in the woods and know how to start fires. So where do you get your fire from? Well, you go down to the Temple of Vesta. You go to the Sacred Fire, and their job was to keep the fire going all day, all night, for eternity. And you go down and you give an offering, the Temple of Vesta, you pay the fee, and you get a stick of fire, and you bring it home. And that's how that works. You light your fire in the winter, you keep it going, you let it go out in the summer, and then you come back and do it again. So let's say that you're a believer, and you say, I don't want to offer an offering to Vesta. I don't want to go down there and give them a sacrifice in order to get some fire. How are you lighting a fire in your house? Were you going to go to your neighbor and say, hey, neighbor, can I have some fire? And the neighbor says, you mean the fire that I just walked across town and paid for? The fire that you're too lazy to walk across town and pay for? You want me to give you some of that? You really think you're going to go next door and ask for fire? Like most of y'all, the fire part is easy, right? Walking across town is easy. Most of you wouldn't ask for help moving a refrigerator. Right? You wouldn't call your neighbor and say, hey, come help me move a refrigerator. But you're going to go and ask somebody else who just walked across town and paid for a fire to give you some for free? No, you're not going to do that. How are you going to get this fire without interacting with a local idolatrous temple? And it's not just that. Let's say you're having trouble having kids. Well, what they would do if you're having trouble having kids, and you would go down to one of the fertility temples, you engage their services, and you don't just pay and ask for a blessing in there. You have to go and engage with the priestesses. And that's how you get things taken care of so you can come back and get your wife pregnant. And you're having trouble having a baby. You're believers in Jesus, you're having trouble having a baby. And mother-in-law keeps saying, I don't know what the problem is. Just go down to the temple, do what everybody else does, get this worked out, and give me grandkids. What's the problem? Your sister did it and she got pregnant. Your aunt did it and she got pregnant. Your neighbor did it and she got pregnant. Who are you to say that your God won't let you do that when your God won't get you pregnant? My God will take care of it. Just go down the street and get it taken care of. The idea that you can avoid idolatry is almost impossible, and the pressure on you would be insane because you've got this thing where everything your body desires is not just allowed, but is encouraged, and you got to fight against the cravings of your flesh. You got to deal with shortcuts because the shortcut is just throw them the party, right? They're going to do it anyway. Just throw them the party, get the deal, give your offering to the church, take care of your family, just take the shortcut. Or the pride that says, no, I'm not going to give in to those things. No. And you fight against this pride because everybody else is doing it. And you watch as everybody else gets pregnant and your wife doesn't. And you get hurt and you just want to relieve that hurt. Or you watch as everybody else has fire and you're trying to figure out the fire. And you just want to give in because the pride is pushing you to it. Guys, we read this list, and this list is bonkers. This is a list that we would never look at and read. I'm uncomfortable reading it to you, okay? But this is not just about them being perverts and having a serious problem that none of us have. But this is about the fact that not only are they in a society where their desires are encouraged, but they're having to deal with shortcuts and losing business and losing jobs because they're not willing to take the shortcuts. And missing out on what everybody else has and the solutions that everybody else says is the solution to the problem. And their pride gets hurt every day because they have to walk out. And there comes a point where you break. But the reason you break is because you don't see the consequences. You just see the relief. You don't see the pain, you just see the pleasure. You don't taste the poison, you just taste the sweetness. And as hard as we might have it, these people had it so difficult because everything in their society warred against what they were supposed to do. And every day they had to decide, am I going to stay on the path of the Spirit and am I going to jog over here to the path of the flesh? And I know what most of them did. It doesn't say here, but I know what most of them did. Because I know what we do. Yeah, I know I'm not supposed to do that, and I love Jesus and all, but Jesus gets Sunday, and I have to live in the real world Monday through Friday, right? I know it's not supposed to be that way, but you don't understand dating in 2025, and I would really like to get married. And this is just the way it is, so it's what I've got to do right now. Well, you don't understand how expensive it is out there. You don't understand what we got to do, and we're so in debt that I can't, and if I don't take this step, we're going to lose it all. You don't understand how hard it is for me because I know that I shouldn't be drinking the way that I'm drinking. I know that I shouldn't be doing that, but you don't understand what it feels like. And if I can just get a little bit of a relief, I can make it okay. If I just take that little bit of relief, I'm okay. I know what they did. I know that Peter had to write about this because they were throwing the drinking parties, knowing it was wrong, but thinking this is how you have to live in the world. I know they went to the fertility temple, knowing it was wrong, but wanting mother-in-law to just get off your back, to stop having to walk out and being the only one without a kid. I know what they did because I know what we do. We stay on the path of the Spirit until we see something over here. I would say, I'm just going to run off and I'm going to grab a little, just a little. I'm just going to grab a little and then I'll come back. And we get over here and we get stuck. We get bogged down, mired down. And we look around and say, how did I get here? I just wanted a little, and then I was going to go back. How did I get over here? How did this happen? Peter said, look, you're walking the path that Jesus has walked in front of you, and if you're going to walk it, you have to walk it with the same attitude that he did. And that is to not just look at the pleasure that's over here, the relief that's over here, the sweetness that's over here. but to remember that this stuff over here is what brought Jesus to the point of having to die for us. It kills us. It's poison. And it tastes good. But it will ruin you. Verse 5. But they will give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is why the gospel was preached even to those who are dead, that though they are judged in the flesh the way people are, they might live in the spirit the way that God does. Let me just address something real fast. It's kind of a controversy. I spent a lot of time on this week. Just trying to figure this out. The idea that the gospel being preached to the dead, what does that mean? And there's disagreement about that. Some people think it refers back to what we talked about last week with Jesus going to speak, preaching to the spirits in prison. If you want to know more about that, go back and watch last week. It's all on the website. But I think what he's referring to is us, we who are dead in our sins and trespasses. That what Jesus did is he came and preached to us who were dead, that he came onto the path of the flesh with us and preached to us so that we might be saved. You can disagree with me if you want to, but that's where I'm at, and that's what I'm going to say it. He said, look, you look at the path over there, and you see the sweetness, and you see all of that, and you got to remember to look at the way that Jesus did. It's not just about the sweetness, it's about the poison. But you've also got to remember this, that it's not just a temporary fix, but there is judgment coming for them, just like it is for you. The difference is that they don't have anyone to take their place. So why then do you care about what they think about you? He said, they do all these things and you don't do these things, and then they malign you for doing those things. They get at your pride for those things. They try to use peer pressure on those things. But why are you afraid of what they think? You can't just remember that there's poison over there, but you got to remember that the people that you're afraid of, the people that you're worried about judging you, are people who are on their way to judgment. What do you care what they think? They will give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. The reason that they're over there, the reason they have to give an account is the whole reason that Jesus came to rescue us, to pull us off of that path. So that when we are judged, we might live anyway. He said, you have got to pick a path. You've got to look at the path the way that Jesus did, and you've got to remember the consequences of this. It'll ruin your life. But the people's whose examples you're following are people who are bound for judgment and hell. Remember that. I'm picky about how old you need to be really to work in youth ministry. Because here's the problem I had working in youth ministry. I started in youth ministry when I was 20. Is you're too close. And you're still young enough to care what teenagers think about you. You need to be 30, 35, old enough to recognize that what teenagers think about you does not matter. It's a good place to be in parenting too. Like when you recognize, hey, I appreciate your opinion, I appreciate all of that, but I'm going to do what needs to be done. And I mean, I'm sorry that you don't like that, but I know better than you on this. You make a lot of mistakes being young in youth ministry because you're so concerned about what these teenagers think about you that you make bad decisions. You got to be separated enough that when you make a decision, it's not influenced by the opinions of children. They're good people, you love them, you like them, but you shouldn't make your decisions based off of their opinions. And the problem that we have with the people out there who are not on the same path we are is we're too close. And we look at their opinions and we say, your opinion matters to me. What you think about me matters to me. And so I'm going to twist what I do. I'm going to twist what I say so that you think well of me. And we forget that we should not allow our opinions to be determined by people who don't know what they're talking about. Our decisions should not be led by people who are bound for destruction. They're going to give an account. And so will you. So follow the path that Jesus has laid out for you. Trust his steps, not their steps, because they are bound for judgment. Pick a path. Look at the path the same way that Jesus does. Don't allow people who are on their way to hell to influence you because you care about their opinion. And if all of that is not enough for you, then this, verse 7. The end of all things is at hand. Therefore, be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. The time is coming for you. It's coming. It's at hand. You don't know when it's going to be. You don't know when you stand before God. You don't know what that's going to be like. You got to live here every single day waiting on that day and making decisions every day. There is a day coming where the consequences will be dealt with. But there's also consequences for today. Peter echoes this idea 3 different times throughout 1 Peter, the idea of there being some kind of problem between you and God. And here's what I want to make really clear about this, that we believe that we are saved by the work of Jesus, not by our own actions. So if you trust in Jesus, he puts you on the path of the Spirit, and you may still mess around over here, but you're still saved by him, not by which path you choose. But that doesn't mean that you and he are always going to get along, right? Let's say you're married, and let's just make the guy the bad guy here, okay? Because everybody's lives will be easier if I do it that way. Let's make the guy the bad guy, and the guy, he doesn't pay attention to the anniversary. When he comes home, he's just on his phone. All he cares about is watching sports and doing his own thing. He takes all of his time when he has free time to go play golf, and his wife is at home with the kids, doing all the work at home, taking care of everything at home, trying to make things good at home. He doesn't clean up. He doesn't help. He leaves his clothes everywhere. How well will these two people get along? You say, well, it sounds like my marriage right now, so I don't know. Not well. Not well. Are they less married than they were before? Well, they're still married. For now, they're still married. But is the relationship a place that you would want to be in? No. I don't want to be there. And if you've trusted in Jesus to save you, your relationship with him is solid. You are going to heaven. You're made right with him. That's not an issue. But that doesn't mean that y'all are going to get along any more than a bad husband is going to get along with his wife. And Peter is his name, echoes this idea 3 different times in the scripture. The idea that you do something and it interferes with your relationship with God. And he says it here. Like, if all of that is not enough, the consequences and the pain and the judgment and why you listen to them anyway, if all of that is not enough for you, understand this, that things are not going to be right between you and God. Not eternally, but in the moment. If you keep running around on him to do other things because you don't trust him to provide, because you don't trust him enough and are not committed enough to him to keep things under control. He said this, he says that if you don't do these things, if you don't keep it under control, your temporary moment-to-moment life is going to be harder. Not because of the long-term consequences of cirrhosis of the liver or finding out that you're in a bunch of debt or losing your marriage, but the short-term consequences of you need help from God and you're not going to get it. Because if things aren't right at home, I don't know what you think you're going to get at home. And if you keep running around on Jesus, don't expect him to show up and take care of these problems you keep having until you're ready to come home and fix things. People will say, I just don't feel saved. I don't feel like God is there. I feel like when I talk, I just feel like I'm hitting a ceiling. I just don't know. Maybe I need to be saved again. Maybe I need to be baptized again. And the place that I always start is not with you need to be saved again. But how's your relationship with God? How much do you talk to God? How much time do you spend with God? Are there things that God is telling you to do that you're choosing not to do? Are there things that God is telling you to stop that you're choosing to continue? Because, guys, whenever you're a bad husband, it doesn't feel like marriage is a great thing. It may not even feel like you're married. And it's the same thing with a wife doing the opposite side. And there are going to be times that when you're far from God because you're disobeying Him and you're bouncing back and forth the path, and you pray to Him and nothing happens, you feel like, I don't even know that He's there. I don't feel like we have a relationship. Maybe I'm not saved. My first guess is generally not that you're not saved, that you did what needed to be done, you believe, you recognize, you understand, but somehow that connection didn't go through. But rather, it's that you have a relationship with Him, but it's so terrible that y'all aren't on speaking terms. And Peter says this, it's like, look, guys, if it's not enough for you to look at their lives and the destruction in their lives and the fact they're going to be judged, then look at your own life. Is there anything about the way that you're living that would make God want to say, yes, I want to answer that person's prayers? Yes, I want to get involved in that situation? Anything? There is a battle that we have to fight. And we're going to face the desires, the temptations of our body. We're going to face the desire for shortcuts. We're going to face the pride that pushes on us. And you're going to fail. Me too. Failed this morning. I was real mad this morning. Failed this morning. The question is not, are you always going to stay on the path that you're supposed to be on? Are you always going to get it right? Because you're not. The real question is this: do you struggle with your sin, or have you just given in? Have you just accepted it? This is the world you live in. This is the way that things are. This is one of those things that we really struggle with, because when I say you got to stay on this path and don't go jumping around, you're like, well, I do that all the time. I might as well just give up. But Jesus saved you while you were a sinner, knowing that you would continue to sin. And the goal is not perfection, because He has to be perfect for you. And we all understand this. The question is, have you just decided to give in and just stay on this path and go over there you want to and get pulled out and go back, and you just accepted this? Or are you struggling against the sin? That when you go back, you immediately cry out, Jesus, come and get me. I messed up again. Or have you settled over here on this path where you get locked down and tied up and muddy and embarrassed to come home? You're going to fail. You're going to mess up. You're going to sin. The question is, will you give in to that sin and accept it, or struggle with it? Because if you will struggle against it, He will struggle with you. But when you decide, you know what, I'm just giving up, don't be surprised when He's not coming in to save you every single time you get in a bind. Peter echoes this idea that when we work on our relationship with God, God participates in that work. We have a great relationship. It's not about perfection. But when we give in and decide, you know what, this is the way that life is, I'm just going to hang out over here and trust Jesus to get me into heaven, it's not good. So I want to ask you this. When you're looking at the other path, are you just looking at the pain, the pleasure, or the pain? When you take that shortcut, are you taking that shortcut because you don't trust Jesus to take care of it if you don't take that shortcut? And when you make excuses about, well, I can't say that at work because I'll get fired. Or I can't say that around those people because I'll lose that relationship. Or I can't do that around those people, or I can't refrain. Is that really a question about Jesus providing for you and His ability to take care of you? Or do you just not want to be embarrassed? Is your pride too big? You're going to fail. We're all going to fail. But that's why Jesus died for us. The question is, will you walk the path the same way that He did, with the same attitude He had, and cry out to Him when you mess up? Or will you settle in the mud and the filth? Because why even bother trying? What will you decide? And more than that, what will you decide tomorrow? And the next day? And the next day? Will you give in to your pride and your cravings and the shortcuts? Or will you have the same mind that He had as He walked the path before you? You stand with me? Our Heavenly Father, we come before you, and I'm so grateful for the chance to look at your word here, Lord. And I'm not sure I communicated this adequately. I'm not sure that I got it all out in the way that you wanted it out, but I trust you, Lord, to make up for where I fail and where I fall short. I ask that if there is one who's just settled in to the mud and the filth of the path of the flesh, who's just given up, that they will see the poison that they've brought in themselves. They'll see the consequence and see your love. And they wouldn't just ask for help getting through with the intention of coming back, but they would cry out to you for rescue as they did before. And Lord, I ask that we would be a group of people who show mercy and grace when other people fall off the path and want to come home. That we would recognize that were it not for you, that we would be in the same place as them. And let us be a people who welcome people back on the path. Thank you, Lord. And it's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.